Attacking smart kids and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials, and the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Again, this is Mark Fisher. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is called Attacking Smart Kids. Attacking Smart Kids. But first, before we get to attacking smart kids, we have to demonstrate to you in America how incredibly interesting things are getting with respect to the Biden administration. First up, so HHS.gov, that's Health and Human Services.gov, they actually have the ability to produce their own videos. And they tweeted out yesterday, HHS, and they also tweeted out a video. And you can also go on their website to see the video if you really are dying to see it. It says, please join us in congratulating the Health and Human Services, ASH, Assistant Secretary of Health, that's what that stands for, ASH, as she has been named the first ever 4-star transgender official and first 4-star of the USPHSCC. The health of our nation is in good hands with her dedication, leadership, and expertise. Congratulations, Admiral Rachel Levine. Congratulations, Admiral Rachel Levine. So, podcast listeners, here is what this means. In the Daily Caller, Biden official is sworn in as the first transgender 4-star public health admiral in United States history. U.S. Health Secretary Dr. Rachel Levine became the first transgender 4-star officer in the Uniformed Services after being sworn in Tuesday into the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps. Remember, she's not even the Secretary of Health and Human Services. She's the assistant. But we all know why. That she got this designation, which we will go into in a few moments. The Department of Health and Human Services had a swearing-in ceremony for Dr. Levine to make her a 4-star admiral. She is now the highest-ranking official in the Commission Corps and will be in charge of leading 6,000 public health service officers. The United States Health Service uses Navy ranks and is a uniform service, but is not the military. I am deeply honored and grateful to join the ranks of men and women across this great nation who have committed to defend the United States against small and large threats, known and unknown. I promise to uphold that trust. Well, we actually have the clip. And we have several clips to play for you. But remember, while these individuals are not military, they are uniformed as if they are the military. And let's face it, if you are in a time of war, which my personal opinion is we are in a time of war, in a pandemic against an adversary who released it intentionally. That is my personal opinion, podcast listeners. My personal opinion is that China intentionally released this pandemic upon the U.S., this virus upon the world, and specifically against the West. And when you have these individuals in health and human services who are uniformed, they take on a different role. And that role is wartime role, which is kind of what this looks like to me. But as you can imagine, there are other reasons as well, because after all, we are talking about Dr. Rachel Levine. Well, here is the beginning of the Health and Human Services video that they cut themselves. Remember, this is the United States Federal Department, and they're so big and bloated, they can make their own videos. They probably had like their own video production facility and video production experts that are federal government officials. Unbelievable. You wonder why, the United States spends so much money, because it's not enough just to promote Dr. Levine and maybe have the media there to do the video for you, because that's what the media would do. They would just broadcast it, record it, and then broadcast it. No, you have to have your own internal system. But there's more to this. We're going to talk about it in a minute. First up, here is the first clip with the HHS video. Here it is.
Good morning. Welcome to the ceremonial swearing-in of our new 4-star Admiral of the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, Dr. Rachel Levine. I'm Andrea Palm. I'm the Deputy Secretary here at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The path towards equality is a long one, but today we are taking a historic step forward with the appointment of Admiral Levine as the first openly transgender 4-star officer across the uniformed services. I am proud to serve at HHS as history is being made and to support a more diverse future.
So remember, podcast listeners, while this particular podcast is called Attacking Smart Kids, and we will get into that, remember where we are now in the United States of America, where the whole purpose of advancement is no longer merit. No longer merit. It's diversity. It is all about the fact that you have put a first in place. Does that really matter to you if the person has merit, or does it matter to you that the person has diversity? In other words, do you want someone leading in departments and in leading positions across the United States who are highly qualified to do the job so that you have the utmost confidence in them? Or do you want people promoted based on the way they look or based on the latest fads, whatever that may be? So here's Dr. Levine in the HHS video actually taking the oath of office. Listen very closely, and this will prove my point. Here is the clip.
I state your name.
I, Rachel L. Levine,
Having been appointed an officer in the Commissioned Corps of the U.S. Public Health Service,
having been appointed an officer in the Commissioned Corps of the U.S. Public Health Service,
in the grade of Admiral,
in the grade of Admiral,
do solemnly reaffirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
So, first of all, I thought it was really funny that when the initial oath of office takes place, the individual performing the service says, I state your name. And of course, immediately I thought of Animal House,
I state your name.
I state your name.
Do hereby pledge allegiance to the frat.
Do hereby pledge allegiance to the frat.
With liberty and fraternity for all.
Amen.
But podcast listeners, this is Dr. Levine taking the oath of office because she deserves to be a 4-star general simply because Dr. Levine is, we're going to say it, a transgender. Don't take my word for it. Listen to Dr. Levine. Here is Dr. Levine immediately after taking the oath in Dr. Levine's own words as to why this event is so significant. We have that clip, and here it is.
Diversity makes us stronger. Each person has a different perspective and different strengths that they bring to make the whole community stronger. The time is now for our country to continue to move the bar forward for diversity. And I am proud to wear this uniform and answer that call.
The word diversity in Dr. Levine's speech was used many, many, many times. That was just a small clip from Dr. Levine's acceptance speech. Diversity is all that matters with Democrats, you see, because diversity to them is based on the way you look. Diversity to Democrats has nothing to do with competence. Diversity with Democrats has nothing to do with merit. Diversity has nothing to do with diversity of thought. It's all about the way you look. It's all about being cool. And so now we have a 4-star dude with a wig on who heads HHS. Here, podcast listeners, is my point about this whole matter. Here is the point. Do you not remember, podcast listeners, that good old Dr. Rachel Levine removed her mother out of a nursing facility in Pennsylvania when she was the Secretary of Health of Pennsylvania during peak COVID, while at the same time directing nursing homes to take COVID patients? So again, Dr. Levine as the Secretary of Health of the state of Pennsylvania decided during peak COVID that one of her choices and one of her uses of her power was to say, hey, you know what? It's way too dangerous for my mother to be in a nursing home during peak COVID, just a terrible place to be. So she moved her mother out of the nursing home while at the same time writing and making a directive that nursing homes need to take COVID patients. And this is the individual that the Biden administration says should be a 4-star general because they are virtuous, not competent, not the best person for the job, not full of merit. No, they are just virtuous. It doesn't matter how many people they killed during the peak COVID period in the state of Pennsylvania by her policies, which made no sense at all. In fact, they, without question, resulted in people dying. And everybody knows it. And yet the Democrats promote you for that. You get promoted for that. Kind of like Pete Buttigieg, right? You run South Bend, Indiana into the ground, but you get promoted to the Secretary of Transportation. That's how it works in Democrat circles. And so, podcast listeners, the HHS video is produced by them, as I mentioned before. And get this, when you go on the video, they've turned off comments. You can't comment. You can't comment on YouTube under the video. Why is that, I wonder? Why do you suppose? Why do you suppose the government doesn't want to hear from the people about what they think about this bogus 4-star general? And I want to make clear to you, podcast listeners, my opposition here to this 4-star general is because it was made a first for only that reason, not because of merit. That's my opposition. That's my opposition. It just makes perfect sense. And the other part of my opposition is this individual, as I mentioned before, it's all over the media, killed people in Pennsylvania, while at the same time doing the complete opposite with her own parent. And so I have to read to you what they put in Gateway Pundit about this particular incident, this particular Health and Human Services 4-star general appointment. Gateway Pundit, transgender health official Rachel Levine sworn in as first female 4-star admiral in public health corps. The Biden administration on Tuesday announced Rachel Levine, an openly transgender health official, biological male that is, was sworn in as the first female 4-star admiral in the public health corps. Meanwhile, China is expanding its nuclear missile silo field and just launched a new hypersonic nuclear-capable missile that circled the entire globe at low orbit. China's new space nukes could evade the United States missile defense systems. That's the whole point of hypersonic missiles, not just that they're fast, but that your missile defense systems can't defend them. While China is flexing its nuclear muscle, the woke Biden administration is focused on white rage, maternity paratrooper suits, French manicures, and promoting transgenders. Quote, I stand on the shoulders of those LGBTQ plus individuals who came before me, both those known and unknown, Levine said at the swearing-in ceremony. Quote, may this appointment today be the first of many more to come as we create a diverse and more inclusive future. Levine will take on a leadership role in the Public Health Service, a team of more than 6,000 people who respond to public health crises and natural disasters, which, by the way, occur also in times of war. The Corps has helped support vaccinations during COVID-19 as well, The Hill reported. Levine, who previously served as Pennsylvania Secretary of Health, has a horrible track record. The coronavirus ravaged nursing homes across the United States because of deadly Democrat policies of forcing people who were infected with COVID-19 to go into long-term nursing care facilities, thus killing many, many thousands of people and elderly inside those facilities. Meanwhile, Levine removed her 95-year-old mother from one of those same facilities and put her mother in a hotel instead. And that's what it takes, podcast listeners, to get promoted as a Democrat right? As long as you look differently or put a wig on and a dress, you know what? You can be anything in America. So next up, podcast listeners, as we said, this particular podcast is called Attacking Smart Kids. And that's exactly what is happening throughout the United States. So in the New York Post, Bill de Blasio's attack on gifted education was the capstone to his dismal reign. And this is from Rich Lowry. And podcast listeners, this is happening across the country. It probably is even happening in your school district, whether it's a town or a county or a parish or wherever you are in America. It's probably happening where you are too, where your school boards or your superintendents of schools are actually and actively engaging in removing any kind of gifted and talented programs or advanced programs or AP programs. So Rich Lowry says, gifted students have to check their privilege and get over themselves. It doesn't matter whether they are minorities. It doesn't matter whether they were brought to the United States as children. It doesn't matter how poor their families may be. It doesn't matter if they have inspiring personal stories. It doesn't matter how hard they work. No. The very fact that they are getting accommodated in classrooms and programs that don't necessarily represent the demographic makeup of their school districts at large means they need to be brought down a notch. If there were any doubt that equity is now the most destructive concept in American life, the war on gifted and talented programs across the country, from California, on the verge of eliminating math tracks in 10th grade, to Seattle, which eliminated its honors program for middle school students, to suburban Philadelphia, where a district is stopping tracking for middle school students and limiting it for high school students, removes all doubt. Tracking meaning, being able to go to the higher courses based on ability, based on merit. New York City has been a major battleground for the anti-gifted agenda that runs under the banner of desegregation, as if the offense of the George Wallaces of the world is no longer blocking the schoolhouse door, but teaching exceptionally talented students at an accelerated pace. Mayor de Blasio just moved to significantly crimp the city's gifted programs, disproportionately utilized by white and Asian American kids, admittedly, in a sop to racialist bean counters. As the New York Times notes, the mayor has been criticized for not taking forceful action to fulfill his promise of tracking inequality in public schools. So in other words, because of equity, there can't be excellence in public schools. It's happening, podcast listeners, across America. In The Hill magazine, Achieving Equity Through Mediocrity, Why Elimination of Gifted Programs Should Worry Us All. And by the way, this particular opinion article, is written by Jonathan Turley, who's the Shapiro Professor of Public Interest Law at George Washington University. I got to tell you something. As an alum of George Washington University, I can tell you that Jonathan Turley by the way, I'm an alum of the undergrad, but Jonathan Turley is not a Republican. He's a liberal, but he's a classic liberal. So journalist H.L. Mencken once denounced public education as an effort simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed a standard citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. Mencken's fears may be coming true in a way that few of us thought possible just a few years ago. While much of our public debate today has centered on the teaching of the concepts of systemic racism and white privilege, a far more worrisome trend is sweeping our public school system today. Across the country, school districts are removing advanced programs and even standardized testing to achieve an artificial appearance of equity. Indeed, it promises a kind of equity through mediocrity that all families should reject. Remember, this is a law school professor, who's a liberal, who's crashing against this stupidity. This movement was on display this week after New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the elimination of the Gifted and Talented program for the city's school system. The G&T programs, Gifted and Talented programs, have been denounced by some as racist because a disproportionate number of white and Asian students are in the advanced programs. The move is part of a campaign to eliminate racial disparities, not by elevating the performance of minority students, but by removing standardized testing and special programs that highlight such disparities. In other words, podcast listeners, we don't like the outcomes that we're seeing in public schools, and rather than holding the parents accountable and the teachers accountable and the administrators accountable, let's just stop testing. And if we stop testing, then we won't have any differences. And at the same time, we got to get rid of those gifted and talented programs to make sure that we really kill the differences. Despite billions spent on public school systems, there remains a chronic failure to achieve bare proficiency in reading, writing, and math for many public school students in cities like New York, Washington, Detroit, DC, and Baltimore. The response by many as to declare standardized testing or meritocracy as racist. Yeah, so standardized testing and meritocracy are racist, right? So the guy or the girl who studies like constantly because they really, really want to get up and out and they really want to excel. And as a result of that, they are rewarded in a system of merit. That's racist now, according to some. And many other districts want to eliminate special programs or schools for gifted students. So even schools that have like specialized schools for the gifted and talented, they want to completely wipe those away as well. In Oregon, the governor and legislature went further and eliminated any graduation proficiency requirement in reading, writing, or math. So listen, podcast listeners, I'm going to finish this article because it's just too good from Jonathan Turley. But I will say this to you. We have people come to my office and they are juniors and seniors in high school and they can't write. By not write, I mean they can't write a simple letter. And I'm not talking about just the letter format. Like, you want a letter format with 3 paragraphs and you want an intro paragraph and you want a body of the letter paragraph and a closing paragraph. I don't mean that because that's kind of like the easy part. I mean, they just can't write. They don't know grammar, can't spell, can't really form sentences, can't express in writing effectively what they're trying to say. And that even exists in the colleges too. We've had people come to the office, and this is more likely true than not, who are also seniors, juniors, and seniors, but in college, who can't do it either. So I would say in our office alone, I would say only 25% of the college students who come to us can effectively communicate what they're trying to say in writing. And by that, I mean, we ask them to write a draft of a letter response to someone, and then we will correct it for them and give them suggestions on how to make it better, and they still can't do it. They just can't do it. And it's like, I'm becoming the teacher, right? The office is becoming the teacher. How did that happen? Because of the fact that we've so dummied down public K-12 education. And by the way, in Oregon, really? The governor and the legislature went further and eliminated any graduation proficiency requirement in reading, writing, or math. So you can get a degree, a high school degree, and not know or be proficient in the core subjects. Oh, but I bet you they all know who Dr. Rachel Levine is. That'll be really helpful when you really try to get a job in the real world. So Jonathan Turley continues, de Blasio's move will do little to advance students while likely accelerating the departure of many families from public schools. Well, yeah. Gifted students are unlikely to get attention or advanced work they need to stay intellectually engaged. Some will underperform or drop out. I see that a lot, by the way. You see a lot of kids who are phenomenally intelligent and they're C students because they're not challenged. You also see a lot of kids who are phenomenally talented in art and music and also aren't challenged. And they also drop out. It's also It also is not necessarily good for other students. According to Turley, gifted students are likely to push down the scores and ranking of other students. Currently, students in the other programs can still excel and achieve high-class rankings in seeking college positions. Now, they likely will find themselves less competitive if classes are dominated by gifted students because you no longer have a gifted, talented program. Everybody's in the same class together. And teachers will struggle to keep both sets of students engaged. Rather than improving the performance of minority students, these districts are eliminating testing requirements and programs that recognize disparities in performance. That's the teachers' unions, guys. They're the ones who want to get rid of testing. And we will talk a little bit about that in a few minutes when we talk about good old Terry McAuliffe. Recently, Jonathan Turley says, a Virginia teacher denounced classroom discipline as a form of white supremacy. So you can have a class that's so unruly that no one can learn. Just got people throwing paper airplanes and erasers and hitting you in the head with erasers and just completely and utterly out of control. And this teacher in Virginia said, classroom discipline, it's a form of white supremacy. In a short video, Blacksburg High School teacher Josh Thompson described the positive behavioral inventions and supports, or PBIS, as white supremacy with a hug. The idea of just sitting quiet and being told stuff and taking things in a passive stance is not a thing that's in with many cultures. So if we positively enforce these behaviors, we're by extension, positively enforcing elements of white culture, which therefore keep whiteness at the center, which is the definition of white supremacy, said this Blacksburg High School teacher, Josh Thompson. And so this article goes on, and it's really worth reading, podcast listeners. It's in The Hill magazine by Jonathan Turley. It's called Achieving Equity Through Mediocrity. And as you can imagine, Jonathan Turley, who's a college professor and a liberal, do you think he in law school is going to give someone an A because, he wants to promote individuals simply by the way they look rather than how hard they work? It makes no sense. I'm not saying this isn't happening in law school and grad school and by professors as well. I'm sure that it is. But it's something that is becoming more and more commonplace throughout America, namely that the school boards are being taken over by left-wing radicals. Same thing with many superintendents. Same thing with many teachers. And the parents are being locked out from being included in the process because the parents, by the way, that includes me up until a few years ago, you just naturally trusted the system. You naturally trusted that the system worked on your behalf, especially something so fundamental as public education and school boards and superintendents. You naturally just believed that they were acting in the best interest of your children because we trust and believe in our system and trust and believe in America. But while we were trusting and believing in America, the left took over and is trying to brainwash our children. So, proof be told, Terry McAuliffe, running for governor of Virginia, the same dude who said in a debate with Youngkin, who's the Republican opponent of Terry McAuliffe in the state of Virginia, both running for governor, Terry McAuliffe said, well, I don't think parents should have a role in their kids' education. And he said it not once, but twice to clarify that that's really what he believes. So a greater Washington area news channel, which is WJLA7, interviewed Terry McAuliffe. It was a decent interview. It's about 11 or 12 minutes long. And we have a series of 4 clips, relatively short clips with Terry McAuliffe in that interview. And the reporter did a very good job and gave Terry McAuliffe plenty of time to answer the questions in the way he wanted. First of all, as an observation, McAuliffe was hyperventilating when he was answering the questions. You can tell he is really worried about this election. Incredibly worried. He had no idea it was going to be this close. But doesn't matter. He's going to double down on all that bad stuff. All that bad stuff. Well, here is the first part of this interview. Should parents have a voice in education? We have that clip, And here it is.
You said this. You said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. So are you saying parents shouldn't have a voice in their kids' education?
Sure, parents should have a voice, and parents do have a voice. I mean, I'm a parent of 5 children here in Fairfax County, Dorothy, and I've raised 5 children. The issue is here in Virginia, I mean, you look at my record. I put $1 billion in education. I got rid of 5 SOLs. Why? When I was running for governor, all the parents came up to me and said, you know, there's too many tests here. Children are learning to memorize, teachers are teaching to test. But there is a huge difference. I got into this race because of education. We're 50th out of 50 states in average teacher pay as it compares to the average pay. That's disgraceful. I'm going to raise teacher pay above the national average for the first time ever.
There you go. Terry McAuliffe trying to pay off the teachers union. So first of all, he's lying. He doesn't want parents involved in the public education process. Second, in his response there, he talks about the fact that parents, it's all about the money in public education. So he's saying, you know, we don't invest enough in education. What he means is that he only wants to put taxpayer money in government schools. He has no interest in school choice whatsoever. And that is the big payoff to the teachers union. And then, of course, lastly, he also talks about the fact that, you know, he has 5 children and, you know, he just really cares about this. And there was another point that he made in there as well. And I want to replay that clip because I want you to hear this really closely. And I want to see if you can catch it. Here's that clip again. Here it is.
You said this. You said, I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. So are you saying parents shouldn't have a voice in their kids' education?
Sure, parents should have a voice, and parents do have a voice. I mean, I'm a parent of 5 children here in Fairfax County, Dorothy, and I've raised 5 children. The issue is here in Virginia, I mean, you look at my record. I put $1 billion in education. I got rid of 5 SOLs. Why? When I was running for governor, all the parents came up to me and said, you know, there's too many tests here. Children are learning to memorize, teachers are teaching to test. But there is a huge difference. I got into this race because of education. We're 50th out of 50 states in average teacher pay as it compares to the average pay. That's disgraceful. I'm going to raise teacher pay above the national average for the first time ever.
Did you hear it, podcast listeners? He got rid of 5 SOLs. So those are the standard of learning tests, right? Which actually test what you know. And what he was trying to say there, Terry McAuliffe, is, well, the parents didn't want them. And actually, there may be a little bit of truth to that. But the problem is, you know who really didn't want them? The teachers union didn't want them because it would measure the performance of the teachers. If you test students and you give the students a standardized test after, let's say, a basic 3rd grade math course, as an example, and you're 3 months into the school year and you give the first test to those students, they all take the same test in 3rd grade. And you have a third of those students who simply didn't learn the material. Well, it's kind of a good thing that you've caught that problem so that you can correct the problem right then and there, as opposed to letting it continue and for another 3 or 4 years. But here's the problem. The teachers don't want that test to be given, and they don't want the test to be given because it reflects on their teaching capability. I completely agree with you, podcast listeners, that some children don't learn as quickly as others. All right. I know that. But how do you know what they're learning if you don't test them? Okay. Maybe there is such a thing as too many tests, which is why I said there were certainly some parents that thought there was too much testing. But the real people who don't want it are the teachers. So that's Terry McAuliffe right there, basically saying, well, it's all about more money. Got to spend more money. Teachers union, pay off to the teachers union. We need to get rid of 5 SOLs. In fact, I did that when I was governor before. Well, no accountability. And definitely no school choice, because the so-called investing that he's talking about will be investing in only government schools. So here is WJLA 7 again in that same interview with Terry McAuliffe. Here's the real difference on education. And if you really want to hear clearly the difference between Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin, this is not just the difference in Virginia, podcast listeners. This is the difference nationwide between the Democrats and the Republicans. Here's the clip.
And the real difference on education, let's be clear. Glenn Youngkin has a Donald Trump, Betsy DeVos plan. He has said publicly many times he will take money out of public schools and put them into private. The Washington Post just did editorial, and 3 independent reviews have been done of Glenn's plan. 43,000 teachers will be cut in Virginia.
So that's McAuliffe saying that his opponent, Glenn Youngkin, will take money out of public schools and put them into private. When the fact is that Glenn Youngkin and Republicans, not all Republicans, hopefully we will get to that point, but most Republicans believe that the education money should follow the student. Just like in the state of Virginia, when little Johnny changes his school district from Fairfax County to Loudoun County, the money follows Johnny to Loudoun County to the public school, from one public school to another. What the Democrats have blocked in Virginia and all of the other states where they control public education is money only is allowed to follow you when you move from public school to public school. It's not allowed to follow you when you move from public school to private school. So McAuliffe, of course, puts a really clever spin, as Democrats do. The difference is, because of COVID, parents are paying attention now, and they're really calling out the BS of the Democrat Party and how they are wrecking public education. And so Channel 7, WJLA, also asked the question, well, how do you deliver a world-class education? How does that happen? We had that third clip here in this interview, and here it is.
But the issue is, how do we deliver a world-class education? And the way we do that is invest in it. As I say, I'm going to put $2 billion in.
He's going to put $2 billion in. Right now, think about this, podcast listeners, okay? Think about this logically. You have a guy running for governor. He's Terry McAuliffe. And his payoff to the teachers union is $2 billion, because obviously the money is not going to go to the kids. It's going to go to the teachers, right? It's a payoff. And then when you do the payoff, the teachers union then pays you with handsome donations for your next campaign. But if you use that same $2 billion instead, and you just gave it to the parents across the state of Virginia, that would be game-changing. And I don't know the numbers of how many school-age K-12 students there are in the state of Virginia. I don't know what those numbers are. But if Terry McAuliffe has $2 billion to spend, and that's really what Virginia has, in addition to what they're already spending, I'm saying, on public education, then why not earmark the $2 billion for school choice, right? That's the perfect bill, because for some reason in the Democrat Party, they don't believe in the uniquely American ideal of competition. They're all about monopolies. It's really interesting, right? They love the tech monopolies, but they also love education monopolies. And we know throughout history, monopolies don't work. They don't serve you. They only serve the master who runs the monopoly. So what about vaccinations? WJLA 7 reporter asks Terry McAuliffe. So listen to this two-step. This is when Terry McAuliffe really hyperventilates in this interview. And once again, it shows you and it illustrates, podcast listeners, not just about the differences in public education between the Democrats and the Republicans nationwide and how completely polar opposite they are in their philosophies, but also about these mandated vaccinations. And man, good old Terry McAuliffe really goes back and forth. I mean, just a complete tool, to the point that you can never, ever trust this guy. We had that last clip, and here it is.
We heard a lot of feedback from our viewers in Northern Virginia on where you stand on COVID-19 vaccine. So real quick, yes or no, I know you don't have much time left. Do you support vaccine mandates for state employees?
Of course I do.
What about kids who are eligible to get the vaccine?
I'm for everybody getting vaccinated. I have been a leader in this country. Schools, nurses, doctors. I want every employer to mandate that their employees be required to be vaccinated.
Last March, you told me that you said it should be up to businesses to require that, but you want the state to require.
Oh, wait a minute. I can only do what I legally can do. I can do state employees. I can't mandate I can be a bully puppet. I don't have the legal authority to do that. But clearly I can for 122,000 state employees.
So everybody in Virginia must be vaccinated. That's what good old Terry McAuliffe says, including businesses and the people that work for them. And then when the follow-up question is asked by WJLA7 interviewer, Terry McAuliffe is like, well, I didn't actually say that. I mean, businesses can't be mandated. I mean, can't mandate it. I can only mandate it for all the employees of the state of Virginia. And this is the problem, podcast listeners, right? I mean, we have governors who actually think they can mandate certain parts of your healthcare, and they can't do it. They can't. They can't. It is completely and utterly antithetical to our way of life and our Constitution. And yet this is what the Democrats believe now. And they've weaponized government, and now they've managed to weaponize healthcare. They've weaponized education, public education, by trying to get your kid to hate the kid next to him, and to trying to get your other parents to hate excellence and hate merit. I mean, these are sick people. These are really sick people. And if they take over this governorship in Virginia, I would have to say that if you live in Virginia, you have to really think twice about whether this is a place that is the best place for your school to learn, unless you can afford to send your child to private school in Virginia, which is phenomenally expensive, of course, which is why the Republicans think that the money should follow you, the tax money, because if it follows you, then the money issue is eliminated from the conversation. Now that's taken care of. It's just a matter of what school do you want to choose. So also in good old state of Virginia, the prosecutors in Loudoun County that are trying to prosecute that dad in Loudoun County, Virginia, who was arrested because he was trying to speak at the school board about his daughter being allegedly raped in the bathroom. Obviously something happened, because the kid that did it, that was in a dress, was moved to another school. So something happened. Clearly, they wouldn't have moved the kid if there was no actual sense of truth to what this dad is alleging. But nonetheless, the prosecutor in Loudoun County wants to prosecute the dad. He wants to prosecute, and the prosecutor is funded by George Soros. So once again, podcast listeners, while all of us are sleeping and believing in our system of government, while we're all thinking, school is the one place we can send our kid, and it's really a safe place, and our children are going to learn, and things work. They just work, because this is America. This is the one place where things still work really well. And they've stopped working because the Democrats have politicized public education to the point that they have literally destroyed it in many parts of the country. And in the parts that they haven't destroyed it, they're well on their way of doing so. And everybody knows it, by the way, including teachers. When you speak with teachers, they will tell you. Okay? I mean, they will definitely give you an earful. And the teachers, in my opinion, are the heroes, of course, but the union, in my opinion, is also, the union is, I mean, they're public enemy number one. Teachers are wonderful. Teachers are terrified of speaking up, though, because if they do, they'll be moved, or they won't be promoted, or they'll be marginalized. And we all know that this is the case. Also, speaking of public education, in California, public school enrollment drops to a 20-year low. A 20-year low. Imagine that. A 20-year low in California. That's because, of course, the pandemic, naturally. But what specifically about the pandemic caused California enrollment to drop to a 20-year low? Well, naturally, as you might imagine, it was the fact that parents decided to homeschool or send their kids to private school. And I can only hope that in the really super blue states, or the bluish states, that this will be the defining issue of our time, and parents will finally start looking not at party affiliation, but who's really doing the best for their children and who really means their children well. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Google and Amazon manipulation. Yes, good old Google and Amazon are engaged in massive manipulation. And how are they doing that? Well, Joe Rogan had a guest on his podcast, and he was talking about how Google manipulates the search results. And, Joe Rogan, of course, is on fire now because he gets these individuals on and has a very large audience. And it's wonderful that he's able to talk about this and really call out big tech, about how they're manipulating things. And it's really good, too, that so many millennials are engaged in this and they see this and hopefully learn from this. We have a clip about this. It's really important stuff to talk about. We have it, and here it is.
It's one of the reasons why I stopped using Google to search things too. They're doing something to curate information where, like, if I wanted to find specific cases about people who died from vaccine related injuries, I had to go to DuckDuckGo. I wasn't finding them on Google.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, well, this is crazy. Like,
Yes.
you guys are hiding information. I'm looking for very specific people and very specific cases, and I'm getting CDC websites, and I'm getting articles on the disinformation attached to vaccines and vaccines being safe and effective, which for the most part they are. Just like peanuts are safe and effective for the most part.
So that was Joe Rogan with Alex Berenson. Of course, Alex Berenson being the former New York Times reporter. And now Alex Berenson is on Substack because he's been banned from Twitter and banned from much of social media because Alex Berenson, who is a traditional liberal, by the way, dares to ask questions that others, of course, won't let you ask anymore, especially in social media, because they'll put up the little fact-checking stuff. And then if that isn't enough, then in additional news about big tech, in the New York Post, they're reporting a lady that says, I found an Amazon folder, an electronic folder, by the way, with thousands of audio recordings from my home gadgets. So a woman was shocked to discover just how much data Amazon has collected about her. She posted a viral TikTok video explaining how she requested to see the data, but wasn't expecting to receive so much of it. TikToker, my.data.not.yours, explained, quote, I requested all the data Amazon has on me, and here is what I found. She revealed that she has 3 Amazon smart speakers in her house. 2 are Amazon Dot speakers, and 1 is an Echo device. Her home also contains smart bulbs. Gotta love that. The smart bulbs. That's when you have the bulbs, you talk to them and they light up or don't light up, or they can dim depending on what you tell them to do. And these devices are operated through many of the Internet of Things facilities, such as the Amazon smart speakers, Echo devices, Google, you name them. So she said, this lady, quote, when I downloaded the zip files, these are all the folders I came up with. And you should see that it's a picture of all of these zip files. And all the zip files contains her voice in her own house. And it's being stored on the cloud by Amazon. Yes, that's right. She described them as so scary and played one of her talking about turning on a light. So she's just was talking about turning on a light. That's one of the hundreds of zip files that were stored. There are said to be 3,534 short audio clips in that file alone from her house. Imagine, podcast listeners, some of the things that you might say in your house. Okay. That NSA is eavesdropping on and listening to, or NSA, calls Amazon, and I'm sure they're already doing business with each other. In fact, NSA is probably paying Amazon to get information about people and listening to what you're saying inside your house. I mean, I'm sorry, but what kind of idiot would put these devices in your house thinking that people aren't listening? I mean, just, there's a big market out there, podcast listeners, for somebody to provide these devices in a way that the information never gets out on the cloud. But I'm not sure if that device exists yet or what have you, but I don't think people care until they realize that all this information is out there and some bad thing that they said was somehow put on the cloud. So, quote, the very last thing that I didn't know that they had, I could have assumed that they have, but I don't love that, even though that's in my location. She revealed another file that apparently showed the exact location of her Alexa smart speakers. The social media star often makes videos about data privacy and tech, which I find hysterical, right? Because it's a social media star and she actually makes videos and talks about your data privacy and technology. What an expert, huh? She said, I'm not totally comfortable with everything they have about me. What? not totally. How can that be allowed? How could that? I mean, because once you say it and it's recorded by these devices, it's there forever for someone else. And who knows what else that you say is being listened to, as I said, by NSA and others. And so we got to wonder sometimes between Google manipulating what you get to see, right? As Joe Rogan said, Google is curating what you actually get to see, even though you are trying to see everything there is to see when you do a search. Doesn't matter. Google's curating it because you only get to see what they let you. And then Amazon, meanwhile, snooping like crazy on everything that you say inside of your house if you have an Amazon device. So next up, podcast listeners, MSNBC says Republicans will cheat in 2022. Can't make this up, podcast listeners. MSNBC, the TV network that basically hardly anyone watches, but we have to at Mark and the Millennials to let you know what they are saying, because there are enough people that still do watch MSNBC that they actually believe what MSNBC says. And MSNBC and CNN, as we know, are two networks that will say anything, even when it's so obvious that it is a lie. So an MSNBC contributor says Republicans are going to cheat in order to win the 2022 midterm elections. So frequent MSNBC fill-in host Jason Johnson claimed Monday that Republicans were optimistic about their chances to win the 2022 midterm elections because they intended to cheat. During an appearance on Deadline White House, Johnson, who is the fill-in host, is asked by Nicole Wallace and fellow MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes to predict former President Donald Trump's continued influence over the GOP and accuse Republicans of rigging future elections by passing voter suppression laws across the country that would guarantee them victories. Well, you know what? You got to listen to this. It's just ridiculous. We have the clip, podcast listeners, and here it is.
What do you think happens, Jason? You think they take the wrong lessons from the possibility that they have some success? They seem to be good at that as well.
Well, Nicole, I think they've taken the right lessons, and the right lessons are you can rally people around a lie based on white supremacy and sexism and nationalism and homophobia and everything else like that. And a key thing to understand why Republicans are optimistic next year, even if they're sort of waving themselves and wrapping themselves in a Trump burrito, is they're going to cheat. I mean, they're just going to make voting laws throughout the country that guarantee that they're going to win. There are very few states right now, Nicole, where there is a very good, active, organizing Republican Party. The Republican Party in Georgia is in shambles because they haven't had to work in so long. They just figure that they're going to pass legislation to make it harder for Democrats to vote. The Republican Party isn't really ready to run a campaign outside of the Midwest. They just figure if we can pass enough voter suppression, wrap ourselves in Trump, and intimidate the other side, we can win in 2022.
So as always, when you hear MSNBC and you hear CNN and they talk to these kinds of race baiters to be able to gin up support on the Democrat side, and they talk about these lies, when we hear this, podcast listeners, you can always know that what they're really doing is projecting, because they're projecting about how much they cheated in the 2020 election cycle. And how did they do that? Well, here's what we do know. And here's what we do know 100%. The state of Pennsylvania and other states changed election laws to do mass mail-out balloting. And there were no checks and balances in place to prevent mass ballot harvesting, mass cheating. We know that, okay? We know this is the case because by definition, when you do mass mail-out balloting and you don't have signature check and you allow and don't monitor the fact that there are ballot harvesting, we know that there's so much going on. And of course, I know what the other side's going to say, because we do have, believe it or not, Democrats that listen to this podcast. They're going to say, well, prove it. How do you know? Well, remember, legislatures didn't change these laws. It was judges in Pennsylvania and in other states. And so here you have MSNBC, and they have this fill-in host, and the fill-in host is he's projecting. He's projecting. He's like terrified that Republicans are going to cheat. So, despite the media's long history of decrying voter ID laws as racist and voter suppression, an overwhelming majority of Americans support the implementation of voter ID laws. The polls also found strong support in making it easier to vote early. Okay, so you have both, right? You have people that want to be able to vote early. And I know our state, we have early voting. I think it's 7 days a week, obviously including Saturday and Sunday. And many other states have this as well. But we don't have voter ID. My personal opinion, podcast listeners, is that you should have 7 days. Here's a great compromise. We should have 7 days of in-person voting. All right? We're not going to call it early voting. We're not going to call it late voting. We're not going to call it day of voting, even though I support day of voting, obviously, as in the perfect world, that makes sense to me. But let's have 7 days of in-person voting. Okay? No mail-in ballots, not allowed. And you have to show your ID when you do in-person voting. So you have 7 full days, and you even have Saturday and Sunday. And if you can't figure that out and you can't schedule that in advance when you know exactly what that week is, then so be it. Okay? But Democrats don't want that. Democrats call that, podcast listeners, cheating. They would call that's their version of cheating. It's just so disgusting and it's so stupid that this is what you would do. And so I want you to hear this clip one more time from this gentleman. It's really necessary because you and I know, podcast listeners, that we're going to be talking about this next year in 2022 in a big way. Because you got to fully expect in 2022, the Democrat Party establishment, the DNC in Washington, is going to work through the courts. They're going to try to get an army of lawyers to do the same thing in 2022 that they did in 2020, which is to get the courts to change election laws when the courts aren't allowed to change election laws. But that's exactly what they're going to do. And we're going to be talking about that all through 2022, I'm certain. But in the meantime, here is one of those Democrat operatives on MSNBC, a Democrat operative network, actually projecting. Once again, here's that clip.
What do you think happens, Jason? You think they take the wrong lessons from the possibility that they have some success? They seem to be good at that as well.
Well, Nicole, I think they've taken the right lessons, and the right lessons are you can rally people around a lie based on white supremacy and sexism and nationalism and homophobia and everything else like that. And a key thing to understand why Republicans are optimistic next year, even if they're sort of waving themselves and wrapping themselves in a Trump burrito, is they're going to cheat. I mean, they're just going to make voting laws throughout the country that guarantee that they're going to win. There are very few states right now, Nicole, where there is a very good, active, organizing Republican Party. The Republican Party in Georgia is in shambles because they haven't had to work in so long. They just figure that they're going to pass legislation and make it harder for Democrats to vote. The Republican Party isn't really ready to run a campaign outside of the Midwest. They just figure if we can pass enough voter suppression, wrap ourselves in Trump, and intimidate the other side, we can win in 2022.
And this is the modern Democrat Party, the same party that said for 4 years that Donald Trump had cheated with the help of Russia. That is your modern Democrat Party. How anyone can be a member of it today when you hear this kind of nonsense is just beside me. Can't figure it out. Well, that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.